Disability, disease, and indecision are all one and the same problem. They're the energy of creativity, creative energy, and life force being suppressed on the basis of our own stuck state. And when I say stuck, I want us to imagine that our consciousness and our creativity lives inside of the whole of our being, and we are like a tree, right? When we are in a reactive state to something long-term in our lives that creates pain or harm, we get stuck in a branch and we identify with the branch. And the branch is withered, broken, dissembles itself according to the harm that's been inflicted on it from an external point. It forgets that it has a trunk, right? Now, the metaphor I'm describing does sound a lot like embodiment, but we're going a bit further than just embodiment of trauma and embodiment of emotions. I'm speaking about how the psyche responds to embodiment. I'm speaking about how consciousness expands as a result of processing emotion, yes, but also making choices in accordance with the whole tree rather than the branches. For certain life experiences, we may have been pruned. Women who are highly sensitive are often pruning themselves in order to fit in smaller boxes. I used to believe that the phenomenon of my bigness, right, was unique to me, and it isn't. There's a big thing for women who struggle with accessing spirituality as a whole, and consciousness and evolution and their source-led creativity, the uniqueness of their own creativity, because they feel too big for the boxes that spirituality has handed them. Their energy is bigger. I am not one who appreciates the idea of emotion regulation. My journey into consciousness has been a messy one, right? It's been ping pong balls or a pinball machine, right? Because I've let my emotions lead me. And I've observed what I've learned from that point, right? So my bigness, my intensity has actually served so I can look back and learn from what I was shown. And what I'm aiming to do over the next number of weeks is to translate how consciousness and creativity are interlinked, and how the body-mind connection to the trunk allows us to expand our bigness, to use our energy, to feel our own energy, and recognize that energy has an intelligence of its own and has the capacity to transform our lives if we will notice when we're stuck in a fragment or a branch. For example, right, previous relationships of mine that were painful, I was handed a reality externally, and the assumption was that in order to survive that, I needed to make myself smaller, and I also had to buy into the idea of lack and determining myself according to the wounds that were being made. Like, I didn't deserve in my fullness to be treated well, protected, honored, respected. I had to take on identities of disability, incapacity, harm, because I was feeling the effects of that harm so greatly. The second we refuse to agree to that harm any longer, the faster we get back in the trunk and become the whole tree again. So things like disease, disability, and indecision, they're all one and the same type of branch. Your bigness, your source energy, which is an intelligence, is stuck. And until you revert back on yourself, reflect back on how you got there, like I have had to do throughout my life in order to get to this point where I am self-actualized, and recognize where I have allowed an identity that has been enforced upon me through harm. We are capable of recovery when we choose differently. The behavior, right, changes at the mind level first, and then the body catches up, right? So we make a decision internally to change, and then the body will start to process the emotions that block us from that change. Our problem as women especially is that we get caught in the emotion as it comes up, and we remain in the branch. Letting the emotion come up and noticing the transformation and being ready to make decisions from when we're in our trunk again, when we feel expanded, when our bigness is returned, right? Then our reality transforms. You can try and simplify some of this, but it needs to be as big as it is, and it's metaphor for a new kind of science, right? So I'm calling this the new science of creativity and consciousness, evolution, a map, right? And I am mapping out, and it's an enigmatic mapping of the nature of how we evolve and how our creative force, the one that wants to express, is in fact the part of us that creates that transformation. A lot of the time in our realities, we have been handed false identities. And they're false insofar as they are pain identified. So that process of emotion coming up, we've actioned from that place and trapped ourselves in the branch. When we start to move into the body, and it might take longer than a week, especially for neurodivergence, especially if you've been going through this ricochet between you and a harmful object or harmful subject or harmful entity, right? For a long time, getting back into your bigness where you feel the fullness of yourself allows you to then start enigmatically mapping where your reality wants you to go next, and you're not defining your reality in accordance with the source of harm. Basically, the source of harm wants you to buy into victimhood, disease, disability, and indecision, because then your energy is sourced from them, your identity is sourced from them, and you're linked because you can't let it go. I have a tendency to bounce through branches when I've been harmed, right? And my reaction points are all coming from harm and my different varied ways of attempting to deal with it. Usually people pleasing, fawning, freezing, going into lockdown, becoming a harmed individual, an incapable individual, and forgetting, right, that I can come back and center myself. This doesn't happen over a couple of minutes. Like, for me, it'll take a number of days and a number of reflection points in order to resolve and see, right, I'm inside a branch and I need to come down and into myself. The only way to come out of a branch is to feel. There are thousands of women across the world right now stuck in realities that don't serve them, where their bigness is suppressed and their life force is suppressed and their creativity is suppressed. And it would take one decision mentally for the emotions to start to move and for the reality to start to change and get back into that state of expansion where you start to move up the levels of consciousness and where you're then able to actively express from your highest state. It's simple enough once you get used to it, but there is going to be, as we evolve here and as I share this stuff, an experience of some confusion, right? As we dissolve some of the patterns surrounding those identities. My great friend Dr. Joe calls it getting a hook in you, right? And then taking the bait. People will throw hooks, realities will throw hooks at you. Are you going to bite these? Are you going to define yourself according to these things? Your reality wants you to buy into a branch identity. I'm going to tell you what it feels like to be the whole tree. And what that means for you creatively, personally, emotionally, sensually, on basis of relationship, on the basis of how you interact with the world and how you're able to affect it. Natural agency is a product of health, as is the ability to set firm and clear boundary and recognize where no change, no evolution exists. Inside of the branches, when we are in a fragmented state, it is not our fault that we are stuck there because something has put us there, but it is our responsibility to get back out. Equally, it is our responsibility to recognize that that reality only exists because we are buying into the fragment. Getting back into that trunk and removing the emotional material up and out takes time, and taking time to allow the emotions to come up and to trial new ways of doing things is healthy, but we need that pause in order to reflect and in order to let the idea of a bigger self rise up, let the energy of our bigness return. When you're in the trunk and you are the tree, you are an endless flowing state of life. What hooked you before becomes secondary, not even tertiary, smaller than that. Just a niggling part of your reality that you set appropriate boundary with. You don't have to apologize for your bigness then, and you're not feeling afraid of it. Part of the programming around who we are, particularly those who have been identified with extreme trauma, and I know because I have been one, victimhood, disease, disability, and indecision, right? All of those are nervous system states that change in accordance with when we change our minds. I can be big and healthy and be safe. In fact, the reality is, in order to be safe, you must accept your life force and your bigness. You don't have to be a weakened version of yourself to be afforded safety and protection. It comes naturally then because you're guided from inside and your life is enigmatically mapped for you. You don't have to think about any decisions anymore, and therefore there's nothing to be afraid of. You do things from your inner core and your strength comes from here. And so does your creativity, but we'll get on to that later. That's for the next one.